Tension as Fu and I sat on the bed in her small, scarcely lit room, the pregnancy test strip trembling between us. The single bulb dangling from the ceiling flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows across the peeling wallpaper, a dance of darkness that mirrored the chaos brewing inside me. The air smelled faintly of mildew and yesterday's stew, a stale reminder of normalcy that now felt like a cruel joke. A clock on the wall ticked with merciless precision, each sound a hammer slamming against my chest, counting down to a truth we couldn't escape. We had hovered over that strip for what felt like hours, though the faded instructions promised results in 3 minutes. Time had warped, stretching into an eternity of dread. My palms were slick with sweat, the cheap plastic casing of the test slippery in my grip. Fu stood beside me, her breath shallow and ragged, her dark eyes locked on the strip as if willing it to change. Her hands hovered near mine, trembling, as though she wanted to snatch it away but couldn't muster the strength. Finally, I forced my gaze downward. There it was, 2 stark pink lines glaring up at us, bold and unyielding. Positive. Fu was pregnant. No, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread snapping in the silence. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, the thin mattress creaking under her weight. She clutched the strip like it was a death sentence, her fingers whitening around it as tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks. This can't be happening. It can't. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart was a wild drum, pounding so fiercely I thought it might burst through my ribs. Are you sure it's right? I stammered, desperation clawing at my throat. Maybe it's defective. Maybe we misread it. My words sounded hollow, a flimsy shield against the reality staring us in the face. She shook her head, a sharp, jerky motion that sent more tears cascading down. I knew it. I felt it. I just didn't want to believe it. Her voice broke into a sob, and she pressed her hands to her face, her slender frame trembling as though the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. I dropped to my knees beside her, grasping her shaking hands in mine. Her skin was cold, clammy, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. We'll figure this out, Fu. I promise, I said, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. But even as I spoke, panic surged through me, a tidal wave threatening to pull me under. We were just kids, me, a high school senior with dreams of escaping this village, her, a first-year junior secondary student who still doodled in her notebooks during class. How could we be parents? The idea was absurd, terrifying, a nightmare we couldn't wake from. Fu lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and glistening with fear. What are we going to do? She whispered, her voice raw. My uncle, he'll kill me. He's already mad I'm costing him money for school. If he finds out, I'm done. He'll throw me out, or worse. Her grip tightened on my hands, her nails digging into my skin as if anchoring herself to me could stop the inevitable. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sandpaper. The thought of her uncle, a hulking man with a temper as short as his patience, sent a shiver down my spine. I'd never met him, but Fu's stories painted a picture of someone unforgiving, someone who saw her as a burden rather than family. And then there was my own father. And my dad, I added, my voice barely above a whisper. He'd never let me drop out to raise a kid. They'd disown me. I could see him now, his stern face, his voice like thunder, his pride in our family name shattered by my failure. He wasn't just a father, he was a pillar in the village, a man whose reputation meant everything. This would break him, and me along with him. The weight of our reality crashed down on us, a suffocating force that pinned us to that small, shadowed room. My family's pride, her uncle's grudging support, everything we had, everything we were, dangled by a thread above a chasm of ruin. We sat there, frozen, the ticking clock a relentless reminder of the seconds slipping away. And then, in the silence, our eyes met. Hers were wide with terror, mine surely mirroring the same. Without a word, a pact formed between us, forged in the crucible of our shared fear. The pregnancy had to go. But how? The question hung in the air, a dark cloud swelling with unspoken dread. It loomed over us, heavy and ominous, offering no answers, only more questions, each more perilous than the last. We had no money, no knowledge, no one we could turn to without risking everything. The room seemed to shrink around us, the flickering light casting our shadows into monstrous shapes on the walls. I stood abruptly, pacing the narrow space, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare rug. My mind raced, grasping for solutions that dissolved like smoke. "Maybe we can find a doctor," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Someone discreet, someone who won't talk." Fu shook her head, her voice sharp with panic. "No. My uncle knows every doctor in town. Word would get back to him in a heartbeat. And we can't afford it anyway." She was right, painfully, undeniably right. We were trapped, dependent on the very people who would destroy us if they knew. What about something else? I ventured, my stomach twisting as I recalled hushed tales from the older boys at school, herbs, potions, dangerous secrets passed in whispers, traditional methods. Her eyes widened, horror flashing across her face. "Those are risky. I could die." Her hand drifted to her belly, an unconscious gesture that sent a pang through my chest. Even now, in her fear, there was a flicker of something protective, something she couldn't yet name. "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "But what else can we do?" The desperation in my tone mirrored the chaos in my head. Every path forward was a minefield, every choice a gamble with stakes too high to fathom. Fu bit her lip, her gaze drifting to the cracked window where the first hints of dawn bled through. "There's a woman," she said slowly, her words measured, "in the next village. I've heard rumors. She helps girls like me. But it's dangerous. And I don't even know if she's real." My heart leapt, a fragile spark of hope igniting in the darkness. "It's something," I said, seizing on it. "We could find her. We have to try." She nodded, her face pale but resolute. "All right. But we have to be careful. If anyone sees us, if anyone suspects," her voice trailed off, the unspoken consequences hanging between us like a guillotine. I stepped closer, pulling her into my arms. She melted against me, her body trembling as silent sobs shook her frame. "I'm so sorry, Fu," I whispered into her hair, the faint scent of her soap a fleeting comfort. I never meant for this to happen. She clung to me, her fingers digging into my back. It's not your fault, she murmured. We were both careless. Her words were a lifeline, tethering us together in the storm. We stayed like that, locked in an embrace as the flickering bulb buzzed overhead, the world outside oblivious to the earthquake shattering our lives. My mind churned with images, her uncle's rage, my father's disappointment, the shadowy figure of this woman who might be our salvation or our doom. What if we were caught? What if it went wrong? The questions piled up, each a brick in the wall of fear closing in around us. Finally, Fu pulled back, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. We need to plan, she said, her voice steadier now, edged with determination. The sooner we do this, the better. I nodded, though dread coiled tighter in my gut. I'll ask around, carefully. Obi might know something. He's always talking about his connections. Be subtle, she warned, her eyes piercing. If he guesses, it'll spread like wildfire. I will, I promised, though my confidence wavered. Obi was sharp. One wrong word could unravel everything. We spent the next hour huddled together, whispering plans in the dim light, names, places, contingencies that felt flimsy against the enormity of our situation. The sun crept higher, its pale rays filtering through the window, but it brought no warmth, no relief. I had to leave soon. My family would notice my absence, and I couldn't risk their suspicion. I should go, I said reluctantly, standing. But I'll come back tonight. We'll figure out the next step. Fu nodded, her expression a fragile mask of courage. Be careful. Don't let them see you're scared. I won't, I said, though my heart thudded with every step toward the door. As I reached for the handle, she grabbed my hand, her grip fierce. Wait. I turned back, my chest tightening at the vulnerability in her eyes. What is it? I'm scared, she admitted, her voice small, almost lost in the ticking of the clock. I knelt again, pulling her close. Me too, I whispered, feeling her tremble against me. But we'll get through this together. I won't let you face it alone. She buried her face in my shoulder, and for a moment, we were just two terrified teenagers, clinging to each other in a world turned upside down. When I finally stepped outside, the village lay quiet under the rising sun, unaware of the tempest brewing within us. I glanced back at Fu, framed in the doorway, her silhouette fragile yet defiant. We'll get through this, I said, a vow to her and myself. She offered a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I hope so. I turned and walked away, each step sinking me deeper into dread. The path ahead was a labyrinth of danger and uncertainty, and that question, but how? Echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain with no answer in sight. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of our descent. That night, I returned to Fu's small room. The drug surge had given me clutched tightly in my hand. It was a small white tablet, wrapped in foil, its edges crinkling under my fingers, feeling heavier than its size suggested. Obi's instructions were burned into my mind, a grim ritual I'd repeated to myself all day. 2 sachets of whiskey, the tablet, then 3 more sachets, lie back for 30 minutes. It sounded simple, almost clinical, but the weight of what we were about to do made my stomach churn. Effie's roommate, Claudia, was still away, a stroke of luck that gave us the privacy we desperately needed. The room was dimly lit by a single bulb dangling from the ceiling, its weak glow casting long, wavering shadows on the cracked walls. The air was thick with the smell of the stew we'd cooked earlier, tomatoes, onions, and a hint of smoked fish mingling in a rich, warm aroma. Under different circumstances, it might have been comforting, a reminder of home. But tonight, neither of us could even look at the pot sitting cold on the small wooden table, its contents congealing as the hours ticked by. "Ready?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as I poured 2 sachets of whiskey into a chipped glass. The sharp, biting scent stung my nose, and my eyes watered slightly. The glass was an old thing, its faded floral pattern barely visible, a relic from Effie's family that seemed to mock us with its domesticity. Effie nodded, her face pale but resolute, though I could see the tremor in her hands as she took the glass. She downed the liquor in one swift gulp, grimacing as it burned her throat, her lips twisting in distaste. I handed her the tablet, and she swallowed it with a shudder, her eyes squeezing shut for a moment. Then came the 3 more sachets, each one a struggle as the harsh liquid slid down. Finally, she lay back on the creaky bed, its springs groaning under her weight, and stared up at the ceiling, her chest rising and falling too quickly. 30 minutes, I said, glancing at my watch, it's ticking a relentless countdown. Then it's over. I sat beside her, my hand resting lightly on her arm, trying to anchor her, or maybe myself, in the midst of this storm. The room was silent except for that incessant ticking and the faint sounds drifting in from the village beyond. Crickets chirping, a dog barking somewhere far off, the low murmur of voices carried on the night air. Time stretched, each second a heavy weight pressing down on us. 30 minutes passed. Nothing. Effie shifted, her brow furrowing as she pressed a hand to her stomach. "Is it supposed to hurt?" she asked, her voice small, almost childlike. "I don't know," I admitted, my throat tight. Obi didn't say. We waited longer. An hour dragged by, then 2. Still, nothing. Effie sat up slowly, clutching her stomach harder now, her fingers digging into her skin. "It's not working," she whispered, fear creeping into her wide, dark eyes. "Why isn't it working?" "I don't know," I snapped, frustration boiling over, sharp and hot in my chest. "Obi said it would. Maybe we did it wrong. We followed everything," she cried, her voice rising, cracking with panic. "What if it's too late? What if I'm further along than we thought?" The possibility hit me like a punch, chilling me to the bone. We were out of our depth, fumbling with forces we didn't understand, stakes we couldn't afford to lose. But stopping wasn't an option. Time was slipping through our fingers, and with it, our chance to keep this secret buried. Tears welled in Effie's eyes, spilling over as she buried her face in her hands. "What are we going to do?" she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her trembling frame, holding her as tightly as I could. "We'll find another way," I murmured into her hair, my voice steadier than I felt. "We have to." But inside, terror gnawed at me. Each failure pushed us closer to the edge, closer to discovery, to the wrath of our families, to a future neither of us could face. Days bled into a week, and the weight of our secret grew heavier, a stone lodged in my chest. Fu started missing school more often, her excuses flimsier with each absence. Whispers followed us, soft, insidious rumors curling through the halls, classmates casting knowing glances that prickled my skin. The net was tightening, and I could feel it strangling us. The failure of our first attempt left us shaken, fragile as cracked glass, but Fu refused to surrender. Time was our enemy, every passing day tightening the noose around our necks. One humid afternoon, as we hid in her small room, the air thick with heat and unspoken dread, her voice sliced through the silence. "There's an old woman in the next village," she said, her eyes gleaming with a desperate mix of hope and fear. "People say she knows how to fix things like this." I shifted uneasily on the rickety chair, my stomach twisting into knots. "Is that even safe? What if it hurts you?" "We don't have a choice," she snapped, her voice trembling but firm, cutting through my hesitation like a blade. "I can't let this ruin me." Against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I nodded. The next morning, we slipped out before dawn, the sky still cloaked in darkness, stars fading as the first hints of light bled over the horizon. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of dew-soaked earth. Our footsteps crunched on the dirt path as we trekked through the village, each step pulling us further from safety and deeper into the unknown. The journey was silent, the tension between us a living thing. Fu walked ahead, her pace quick and resolute, though I caught the flicker of panic in her sidelong glances. I wanted to speak, to bridge the gulf widening between us, but my tongue felt leaden. What could I say? That we'd be okay? The lie wouldn't even form. The neighboring village emerged as the sun rose, its huts and fields bathed in golden light. The old woman's hut crouched at the edge, a sagging pile of mud and thatch that seemed ready to collapse. Smoke curled lazily from a small chimney, carrying a strange herbal scent that prickled my nostrils. Fu knocked, her hand shaking against the weathered door. It creaked open after a long moment, revealing the woman, ancient, her skin creased like dry riverbeds, her eyes sharp and unreadable beneath a tangle of gray hair. She stared at us, her gaze piercing, as if she could see the shame branded on our souls. Fu whispered our plight, her voice barely audible, her cheeks flushing red. The woman listened, her face expressionless, then shuffled inside without a word. She returned with a bundle of dried herbs, their scent sharp and bitter, like decay masked by earth. "Boil these into tea," she rasped, her voice low and rough as sandpaper. "Drink it all. It'll bring your bleeding back." We murmured our thanks, though I wasn't sure if gratitude or terror was the right response. As we turned to leave, her gnarled hand clamped onto my arm, her grip iron strong. "Be careful," she warned, her eyes boring into mine. "Some things can't be undone." Her words shivered down my spine, but I nodded and hurried after Fu. Back in her room, the day had turned stifling, the air thick and oppressive. Fu brewed the herbs in a chipped pot, the acrid steam rising in curling tendrils, filling the space with a smell that made my throat tighten. The tea was dark and murky, a witch's brew, and Fu choked it down, her face screwing up as she gagged but forced it past her lips. I sat beside her, gripping her sweaty hand, our pulses racing in unison. We waited, hearts hammering, for any sign it had worked. Minutes stretched into hours, the sun sinking low, painting the room in hues of twilight. But nothing happened. Fu's hope crumbled, her voice a broken whisper. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? I had no answer, only guilt clawing at me. I'd let her cling to this fragile hope, and now we were deeper in the mire, drowning with no lifeline. The second failure shattered something in us. Fu's belly was rounding now, a secret swelling beneath her loose clothes, impossible to ignore. We were desperate, teetering on the edge of sanity. One night, under a sliver of moon that cast pale, ghostly light through the window, Fu grabbed my arm, her eyes wild with terror. "I heard something else," she said, her voice shaking, fragile as glass. "If I jump from somewhere high, it might end it." My blood turned to ice. "That's madness, Fu. You could kill yourself." "I'd rather die than face my family with this," she sobbed, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. "I can't do it. I can't let them know." I argued, my voice rising in desperation, pleading with her to see reason. But her resolve was unyielding, forged in the fire of her fear. She was slipping beyond my grasp, consumed by a terror I couldn't touch. Finally, exhausted and helpless, I gave in, praying this reckless gamble might somehow save us. Near the river loomed a low cliff, its edge jagged and shadowed in the moonlight. The water below churned restlessly, dark and deep, a hungry maw waiting to swallow us whole. The air was cold, biting at my skin, and Fu climbed up, her breath hitching, her hands trembling as she gripped the rough, unyielding rocks. I stood at the base, my chest tight, every fiber of me screaming to stop her, but my voice died in my throat. She jumped. Her body hit the ground with a dull, sickening thud, a cry tearing from her lips that echoed through the night. I ran to her, heart pounding in my ears, fearing I'd find her broken beyond repair. She lay crumpled, clutching her legs, bruises blooming like dark flowers on her skin, her ankles swollen and twisted. But she was alive. I helped her up, her weight sagging against me, and we stumbled back home in silence, the weight of our failure a crushing burden between us. Each step echoed with the reality of how far we'd fallen, how desperate we'd become. Days passed, and the pregnancy clung stubbornly on. But Fu didn't. Her skin turned pale, clammy to the touch, her strength leaching away with every hour. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of orange and red, she pressed a hand to her stomach and whispered, "I don't feel right," her eyes wide with a new primal fear. "We need a doctor," I said, panic surging like bile in my throat. "No," she hissed, her grip fierce on my wrist, nails biting into my flesh. "My uncle, he'll find out. He'll kill me." But in her hollow, sunken gaze, I saw the truth. It wasn't just her family she feared anymore. Something was wrong, terribly, fatally wrong, and our reckless attempts had pushed her to the brink. Her life hung in the balance, and I was powerless to pull her back. Effie's absences began to pile up like leaves in an untended yard. She'd been skipping classes, offering vague excuses about sickness, but the school wasn't naive. Rumors ignited and spread like wildfire through the crowded hallways, whispers bouncing off chipped lockers, knowing glances exchanged over worn textbooks. I could feel it every time I walked through those corridors, the weight of their stares boring into my back, the sudden hush of conversations as I passed. They suspected something, and their curiosity was a ticking clock, counting down to an inevitable revelation. One humid afternoon, as I lingered near the sports field, kicking at the dry grass to distract myself from the growing unease, a shadow stretched across the ground in front of me. I looked up to see Mrs. Ngozi, FU's stern-faced English teacher, towering over me. Her tall frame was rigid, her arms crossed tightly across her chest like a barricade. Her glasses glinted in the harsh sunlight, amplifying the severity in her dark eyes. "Where's Effundum?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the still air like a blade. "She's missed 3 days straight." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I forced a casual shrug. "She's sick," I lied, but the words came out shaky, betraying me. "Stomach trouble, I think." Mrs. Ngozi's eyes narrowed into slits, her gaze piercing through my flimsy excuse. She stepped closer, her presence suffocating. "Sick, I've heard things, boy. You'd better pray they're not true." Her tone was a warning wrapped in disdain. Without another word, she turned on her heel, her footsteps fading into the distance, each one echoing like a hammer striking an anvil. A cold dread settled in my chest. The net was tightening, and I could feel its threads brushing against my skin. The inevitable arrived. FU was summoned to the principal's office. She tried to slip away, to dodge the confrontation, but Mrs. Ngozi was relentless, her grip firm as she escorted FU down the hall. I lingered outside, pacing the faded linoleum, my stomach twisting into knots as I imagined the scene unfolding behind that heavy wooden door. The principal's office was a place of dread, dark wood paneling, a stern portrait of the school's founder glaring down from the wall, and the air thick with the scent of old paper and authority. FU stood before the principal, a man whose reputation for discipline was as unyielding as the lines etched into his weathered face. His voice was low and commanding, carrying the weight of judgment. "Miss Effundum, explain your absences." FU's voice trembled, barely audible. "I've been sick, sir." "Sick?" he repeated, his skepticism sharp enough to cut. He leaned forward, his piercing gaze unrelenting. "Or is there something you're hiding?" The silence that followed was suffocating. FU's resolve shattered under the pressure, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm pregnant," she confessed, her voice a fragile whisper, each syllable heavy with shame and fear. The principal's face hardened into a mask of stone. "Who's the father?" His question hung in the air like a guillotine. FU hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as if it might offer an escape. But there was no way out. With a trembling breath, she spoke my name. My world stopped spinning, the ground beneath me tilting as her words sealed my fate. The school was a storm of chaos. Efu's parents descended upon the building, their fury reverberating through the halls. I hid near the staff room, my back pressed against the cool wall, listening as their voices clashed with the principal's measured tones. Her mother's wails were raw with anguish. "Pregnant? At 14? She's brought shame on us all." Her father's response was a low, menacing growl. "She's dropping out. No daughter of mine stays in school carrying that kind of disgrace." When they emerged, Efu trailed between them, a broken figure. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her school bag clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. She looked at me, her gaze hollow. "They're pulling me out," she said later, her voice drained of life. "They called me a disgrace." A wildfire of emotions surged within me: anger, desperation, guilt. I wanted to scream, to storm after her parents and shoulder the blame, to insist it wasn't just her burden to bear. But fear rooted me to the spot. My own secret hovered on the brink of exposure, and the thought of my family's reaction, disappointment, rage, paralyzed me. I stood there helpless, watching as Efu was led away, her silhouette shrinking into the dusk, her future slipping through my fingers like sand. Suddenly, I jolted awake, my heart hammering against my ribcage, sweat soaking my sheets. "Oh, thank goodness it was just a dream," I gasped, the words tumbling out in a rush as relief washed over me like a cool tide. My breath came in ragged bursts, my body trembling as I stared into the darkness of my room. The dream had been so vivid, so suffocatingly real. The whispers, the accusations, the weight of Efu's confession, that it clung to me even now. It was a warning, a glimpse of the consequences that loomed if we weren't careful. I lay back, the ceiling blurring above me, knowing that while it was only a dream, the fear it left behind was all too real. I couldn't let our families know. My father's pride, a towering monument built on years of discipline and sacrifice, would crumble if he learned the truth. My mother's trust, fragile as the porcelain cups she kept locked in the cabinet for special occasions, would shatter into irreparable pieces. The thought of their faces, his stern jaw clenched in fury, her soft eyes clouded with betrayal, haunted me day and night. I had to fix this before it spiraled further, before the whispers turned into shouts and the shadows of our secret swallowed us whole. Efu agreed, we'd try again. The failures had left us raw, nerves frayed like the edges of an old rope, but it hadn't broken our resolve. This time, I turned to the streets, scrounging up money from odd jobs, hauling firewood for the neighbors, running errands for shopkeepers who paid in crumpled notes and coins damp with sweat. Every penny felt like a lifeline, a chance to claw our way out of this mess. With my meager savings clutched in my fist, I ventured to the next village, a dusty sprawl of tin-roofed shacks and narrow alleys where the air smelled of smoke and desperation. The vendor I found was a wiry man with a crooked grin and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. He stood behind a makeshift stall, a plank balanced on crates, littered with bottles and packets that gleamed dully in the afternoon sun. "You need something strong?" he asked, his voice low and oily, as if he already knew my shame. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze, and handed over the money. He slipped me a small brown envelope, its contents rattling faintly. "This'll take care of it," he promised, his words sharp and hollow. No instructions, no warnings, just a vague assurance that felt more like a taunt. Back in Effie's room, the familiar ritual unfolded with a grim rhythm. The air was stale, heavy with the lingering scent of kerosene from her small lamp and the faint tang of the stew we'd abandoned earlier. I poured whiskey from sachets into a chipped glass, its amber liquid glinting menacingly in the dim light. The sharp scent stung my nose, a reminder of our last failure, but I pushed the thought aside. Effie sat on the edge of her bed, her thin frame hunched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes, usually bright with defiance, were dull with exhaustion. "Ready?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound steady. Stay tuned for part 3, which will be coming to your screens very soon. You can find the link to the part 1 of this video down in the description box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more interesting stories.